Well, welcome everyone to our webinar, Think Critically, Act Locally, Civic Participation Through Media Literacy and Career Exploration. We're going to get started in just a minute, but while others are logging in, please take a minute to respond in the chat to these prompt questions. What's your name and where are you joining us from? How are you involved in civic learning? And what drew you to this session today? So if you can just take a minute and share with us a little bit about yourself while we're waiting for everyone to join. We have quite a lot of people registered for this session today, so we just want to give a minute or two for folks to join the room. While we're doing that, just so you know, we'll be taking questions throughout in the chat. We're not using a Q&A function or raise your hand. But anything you want to share, questions or comments, feel free to do that in the chat, and we'll take those as they come. If we can share them with the speakers, we'll do that as well. And again, if you can, share your name and where you're joining us from, how you're involved in civic learning, and what drew you to this session today. All right, while folks are doing that, let me do a little bit of an introduction. My name is Tony Streit. I'm a managing project director here at Education Development Center, or EDC. We're a global nonprofit that advances education, health, and human development. And we're thrilled to have you join us this afternoon for our session. For the next hour, we'll be looking at ways to deepen civic learning through the integration of media literacy and career exploration, two components of a recently launched civics curriculum we developed with the support of the Department of Defense. So we'll share a little bit about that curriculum, and then we'll engage in conversation. We have an amazing group of speakers joining us today, including our funder at Department of Defense and some of our partners, like the National Association for Media Literacy Education, National Council for the Social Studies, and StoryCorps. And we'll also be joined by a very active civic educator to share her own experiences of weaving media literacy and career exploration into her classroom. We welcome your comments and questions throughout the event in the chat, and we'll try our best to respond to those in real time. So to begin today, we've invited our CEO here at EDC, Lisbeth Stier, to further welcome you and introduce you to our first speaker. Lisbeth?
Thank you, Tony. It's such a great honor for us to be participating in Civic Learning Week along with our fellow Civics Now coalition members. It's so exciting to be part of events that are celebrating and elevating civic learning as a national priority. And I'm sure that you will agree that we are meeting at a critical time for civic engagement and civic education. Time magazine calls 2024 not an election year, but the election year, not just here in the United States, but around the world. In fact, there are national elections in 64 countries around the world this year, representing about half of the global population. So it's a generational opportunity to focus our minds on what's at stake in systems of government, and at a time where we more often face discord than dialogue. Preparing young people to participate not just in elections, but in civic life is the goal of civics education. And we know from research that civic education and learning puts them on a path to active citizenship. We also know that schools have a unique role to play in promoting civic responsibility and helping students see the relevance of civic learning. Yet, as you know, there's a lot of work to be done. While most states require some form of civics education, there is inadequate public investment in professional development and other supports. For every $50 spent on STEM in the US, only 5 is spent on civics. And this lack of investment has repercussions because only 20% of students in the US scored proficient in civics on the most recent National Assessment of Education Progress. And there are other areas where we could act. For example, we know that citizens' ability to engage with public information and media is crucial to democracy. But we see a shortfall in media literacy education. Only half of teenagers surveyed in 2020 reported having learned about media literacy or how to analyze news and media. EDC holds civics as an essential element in a complete education that empowers learners to participate in and sustain our democracy by thinking critically and acting locally. It is the title of our seminar today. We feel privileged to be supported by the DoD in our work to advance civic literacy, and we're so pleased to welcome Louis Lopez, Director of DoD STEM, for this first framing conversation. And Louis, you are really the right person to have this conversation with. Starting out originally as a classroom teacher in mathematics and computer science, you've gained 20 years of leadership and experience in STEM education, outreach, workforce development programs in academia and government. And now you head up DoD STEM, which is pursuing a mission to inspire, cultivate, and develop exceptional STEM talent through a continuum of opportunities to enrich the current and future Department of Defense workforce, poised to tackle evolving defense technological challenges. So, having set out this important work you are doing and your leadership role in all of the important topics we just mentioned, why is DoD funding civics education? Over to you, Louis.
Thank you for that question, Lisbeth. But first I'll say, thanks for having me join this webinar with this amazing group of speakers this afternoon. We certainly appreciate being part of the celebration of the Civic Learning Week, and specifically this session in thinking critically and acting locally. So why is DoD funding civic education? A couple of reasons, but first, I'll just touch up a little bit. I think you've already alluded to this a little bit. So while the DoD STEM is inclusive of efforts across the Department of Defense that address the STEM workforce of today and tomorrow through STEM education outreach and workforce development programs across the K through 20, we engage in other education activities as well, and that includes the Enhanced Civics Education, in which we're proud partners with EDC and the service program. And this is funded through the National Defense Education Program. And really, this started back in fiscal year 2020, when Congress, through the National Defense Authorization Act, said that the Department of Defense ought to invest in activities along enhanced civics education programs in consultation with the Department of Education. So Education Development Center was one of the original FY 2020 Enhanced Civics Education awardees, and is now one of our FY 2023, our most recent solicitation awardees. And so we're so proud to partner with EDC and all the great things that you guys are doing. We applaud their previous efforts to create highly adaptable civics curriculum, modules for teachers, which include tools for teaching topics such as civic inquiry, media literacy, and exploration of public service and public safety careers, and we are excited to see their work moving forward.
Thank you so much. That is excellent. And we are also very proud of our partnership with you and the work we've been able to do together. And I think it would be good to hear a little bit more about why Civics aligns with STEM and STEM careers, because most people might not think of that. They will think about sort of traditional STEM topics and careers. Why is it so important to embed this in STEM education and STEM careers?
Well, you know, part of the requirement that we got when this program was established as part of that FY 2020 National Defense Authorization Act, one of the main objectives on there is how can we promote being a civil servant or public service? As the largest employer of federal scientists and engineers across the federal government and STEM professionals, so it's certainly aligned to our mission in attracting future scientists and engineers in public service, in serving the public through the Department of Defense, through our defense laboratories and engineering centers. We are facing complex global challenges such as climate change, pandemics, diminishing natural resources, and many more. From a national security perspective, just to name a few of our 14 critical technology areas, biotechnology, quantum information systems, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence. It needs these, now more than ever, we need critical and innovative thinkers, as well as engaged citizens to address complex STEM-related challenges today and into the future. And this is where EDC and our other Civics grantees come in. Their programming, your programming, is helping to develop our future workforce, our future leaders that think more critically, that understands how the government works, that stays informed and engaged in civic life.
Thank you so much. That is so well said. And really, especially as you mentioned in, for example, the climate change area, it's not enough to teach people about climate change, but also give them a means to act. And I think that's exactly what you're articulating. You need to have engaged citizens for them to be able to apply that knowledge to then action. So I think that's really wonderful and very well said and explained. You also included media literacy as part of your civics program. Why is that important?
Well, you know, I alluded to this a couple of times. It was also congressionally mandated for us to look at programs that promote critical thinking and media literacy. Well, we think programs being executed under by the DoD are a direct result of the National Defense Authorization Act, as I mentioned earlier. And those 5 objectives under the Enhanced Civics Education congressional language, the very first one is actually critical thinking and media literacy. So media literacy is increasingly important in a world in which people have 24-hour access to both credible and not so credible information. We are all better informed when we make better decisions about the media we choose to trust and consume. So citizens need to be well informed to make decisions about their civic engagement efforts. Policymakers need to be well informed to make decisions in our local, state, and national interests.
Well, thank you so much, Louis. This is very exciting. I mean, for me also, I come from Europe and Belgium. Seeing the interest of the United States Department of Defense in something as important as this is really inspiring. So I thank you very much for all the efforts you are making, and again, for our partnership and for joining us today in this discussion. So now I would like to welcome Reagan Davenport, who is part of EDC. Hello, Reagan.
Hello, Lisa.
Reagan is our Associate Project Director, and she will share a little bit more about service, the supporting readiness in vital civic empowerment. This is our civics curriculum that was recently released with DoD's support. So over to you, Reagan. Thank you.
Lisbeth, thank you so much for the introduction. It's always wonderful to participate in work that focuses on opportunities for students to be civically engaged, and it has been a pleasure to work with the DoD on this initiative. So as Lisbeth said, my name is Reagan Davenport, and I was part of the service curriculum team, and I had the pleasure of participating in this exciting curriculum project, supporting readiness through vital civic empowerment, or as we like to call it, service for short. Also, as Louis mentioned earlier, EDC was fortunate enough to receive funding from DoD STEM, more specifically the National Defense Education Program, or NDEP, to provide enhanced civics education to target skills that help advance STEM, national security, and democracy. Now, being a part of the team, I have quite a story to tell about how the idea of service was born. I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version today, but it really all came down to thinking about civics differently. Our curriculum team, along with some amazing partners, which you will hear from shortly, really wanted to reimagine what civic engagement looks like for youth at this time. Now, we know the academic, civic content skills and professional skills students need to engage with others. However, we felt three crucial components help prepare students for effective civic engagement. And those are inquiry-based civic learning, media literacy education, and opportunities to learn more about public service and public safety careers. We began working on this, and after 2 years of drafting and revising and piloting and revising again based on teacher and student feedback, we ended up with a curriculum that not only honors student voice and choice, but gets at the core of what it looks like to be civically engaged in their local communities today. And that is service. Service is a free, user-friendly, flexible civics curriculum for high school students that incorporates the layers of civic participation, media literacy, professional skill development, and career exploration. We say that blend of all of those things together is our special sauce. And so what service does is it works to build student capacity to participate in their local communities. We heard from teachers during pilot that students were really involved in their local communities. They started going to school board meetings and wanting to learn more about local laws and policies. So that was very important to us. We also want students to build those critical thinking skills that Louis talked about when engaging with information, and take part in experiences that focus on why civics and STEM can lead to opportunities in public service. Next slide, please. Service consists of 5 flexible modules that focus on one civic theme, but they all emphasize civil discourse, understanding critical information consumption and creation, and inspiring youth to develop an ethic of service. Each module has 15 lessons, and along with the curriculum, we've also provided a free teacher toolkit that is always also accessible on the website, which you'll have the QR code to later at the end of the webinar. And we hope that teachers can use the modules and the lessons to supplement core content that they're already covering with students in civics and government and other courses, or use it as the sole curriculum. We did have some pilot teachers that used it as their core curriculum for their class. I think sociology, and we had a government teacher that piloted in their class as well as their core curriculum. So that flexibility is great. This project has shifted not only how I think about civics education, and again, it would not have been possible without the grace, space, and support from our incredible partners, and tireless efforts to ensure that students have opportunities to build their capacity as media and civic literate citizens. I now would like to introduce you to my EDC / service teammate and wonderful colleague, Jessica Juliuson, to talk more about the role that media literacy and career connections have in civic education. Jessica?
Thank you so much, Reagan. I'm Jessica Juliuson from EDC, and along with Tony, I am one of the primary investigators for the service project. And one of the reasons I personally was so excited about this project, I'm a former social studies teacher myself, and I thought that this really allowed us to reimagine what civic education and civic literacy can look like now and will look like in the future. And while we have felt very strongly at EDC for a long time that civics does not exist in a vacuum, it's really the lifeblood that runs through all of our ecosystems. So civics really needs to be part of who we are, how we stay informed, how we make decisions, how we work, how we advocate, how we make a better world. And so as part of this vision, as Reagan told us earlier, service has integrated so many different threads and done it in a really transdisciplinary way. And we could not have done that without that incredible list of partners that you saw, because really, truly, our partners allowed us to approach civics from not from the silo of social studies alone, but really to look at how civics energizes us, motivates us, informs us in our everyday world. We think this is really powerful, and we are very lucky today to have with us some wonderful people who also believe this mix can mean a really new and different way of thinking about civics and civic literacy. So with us today, we have Megan Fromm, the Education Manager for the National Association for Media Literacy Education, or NAMELY. We have with us Larry Pasca, who is the Executive Director for the National Council for the Social Studies, or NCSS. And we have Emily Jansen, who is the Associate Director of Learning and Engagement at the National Nonprofit StoryCorps. And you can hear just from the three different places that they come from, it just really is representative of this truly unique blend that we have in the curriculum. So thank you all for being here. And I would love to ask you, each of you, a little bit more about this unique mix and how you think it might engage students differently with civics. And so Meg, I'd like to start with you. You're an expert in media literacy. You have been an incredible member of our team and an incredible resource as we've developed the curriculum. And in the past, people might have thought about civics and media literacy as really kind of two different subjects, maybe taught in different ways in different disciplines. I saw someone in the chat was talking about libraries and information skills, and that's a place that a lot of times we've seen that those skills are developed. So how do you see them being linked, and how do you think media literacy education supports civic participation?
Thank you, Jess, and thank you everybody for the chance to be here. This was such a great project, and we couldn't be more thrilled at NAMELY to have been a part of it. So we think it is an exceptional way for educators to engage in these topics. When I think about media literacy and civics, I think one of the easiest ways to see the connection is to actually think about what it means to be media literate, and then immediately we start drawing straight lines to civics. And I think about how people who are media literate can ask questions to analyze media, and how people who are media literate can understand how media messages impact society. And they can use tools and processes to ascertain truth. They can understand their own biases and their cognitive limitations, cognitive processes to shape their interpretation of messages. And we think about how people can then use media to thoughtfully and impactfully affect their world. And looking at those outcomes, and for those of us who have taught civics or are already in that field, I see so many wonderful connections, specifically with this idea of acting. Civics is about being participatory, being a part of the world, being a part of your community, and media literacy provides an avenue to do that, especially considering most of our experiences with the world around us often begin or are entirely mediated. And so we may start to learn about our community through a mediated experience, through hearing what our friends say, or from seeing a text message about something, or as a young child, thinking about how buildings are constructed and what a town square looks like because I made it in Minecraft, right? And so we think about all of the ways that our understanding of the world is truly mediated by technologies. And so understanding that, we need some skills. We need a toolkit to work through these, what we call media experiences. And these media experiences shape so much, but they also involve a lot of complex things. So they involve the technology that's in front of us. And that's a great place for technology literacy and digital literacy, which we think of as a subset of media literacy. And when we think about the media experiences, we also think about what we bring to that experience, our own background, our lived experiences, our family history. And that's part of it as well. So we think about even some social emotional literacies and cognitive literacies. We also think about knowing what the technology is doing and who created it and why is it working the way that it is doing. And so we think about technology literacies, right? And then I think especially right now, we are all incredibly and rightfully concerned about the quality of information and how we access information. And media literacy provides a great way to think through media messages. And it's not just about information, but it's about the many forms that information can take. And sometimes it's journalism, and sometimes it's entertainment, and sometimes it's infotainment. And it's complicated. And so media literacy, I think, acts as sort of an umbrella way to find a lot of entry points into how we experience and begin to understand the world around us. And so when we look at it that way, and we think about the potential to use those experiences to become thoughtful, to understand how our world works, to me, they're such a great pairing. And so we're really thrilled to see that come to light, because I think we always in the media literacy field think about civic empowerment and engagement as an incredible and meaningful outcome of media literacy education. So we think they just go hand in hand so beautifully. We're so thrilled to be a part of this.
I love what you were just saying, and it just reminds me how different it is from the way I used to think about civics as a student myself, you know, kind of spitting back the branches of government without really any context. And what you're describing is something that's so student-centered and inquiry-based and question-based. And, you know, you were talking about the need for good questions. And Larry, that makes me think about the framework for the C3 framework that we've talked about in the past, and it's aligned to service. And so, you know, inquiry is something that I know NCSS has been really promoting and advancing, those kind of skills that students need to do inquiry well. And so keeping that in mind, thinking about civic education and how NCSS guides that really across the US through the C3 framework, in your experience working with social studies teachers across the country, what have you found to be effective ways to integrate civic learning into core content from social studies to STEM? And how do you see exploring careers, for example, through civic engagement? How do you see that inspiring civic participation?
Those are great questions, Jessica. And thank you also for involving NCSS in today's discussion. And I will build on what Meg has just shared, which is the vital role that information and information literacy plays. So this is a question that probably has a several-hour answer to it, so I'll try to condense it down to 5 minutes. I'll say to you that we conduct research every year of educators and students from around the country. We have a kind of a state of social studies of our own that we survey, and what we learn from our students first and foremost is that they gain some pretty concrete academic skills through their civic learning, through their social studies experience. One of those skills is the ability to navigate digital and print sources to find information. So I want to highlight what Meg is saying in that building information literacy and infusing that across all subject areas in social studies, in STEM and others is a really critical thing to do. And the reason for that is because students are engaging with sources, whether it's scientific texts, whether it's political texts, historical texts, economic texts, any kind of source for learning, it transcend different disciplines. And so to us, that ability to navigate those different sources and being able to distinguish information is really important. Another thing we learned from our students is the civic benefits they gain from their learning. Our survey last year was about over 32,000 students nationwide, mostly juniors and seniors in high school, but 93% of them reported gaining civic benefits in social studies classes. And the benefits they gain the most, but I'm gonna translate this research to say this really is in any class, these civic benefits. Knowing the world around them is a vital benefit of civic learning in schools, specifically social studies, but I would argue when you're talking about scientific inquiry or scientific method or process in a STEM class, when you're talking about how are we getting satellites in orbit? What is the technology that it takes to do that? What's the math involved in that? Those are current issues. Knowing world events, knowing how these events play out is vital. Another piece of data that we get from our students is understanding their role as a citizen. Half of our students tell us the civic benefit of learning is to understand their role and then to become interested in how they become involved in the community. And when I think of this project and the strength of the service project in particular, the idea of connecting career to public service to civic participation, and you've referenced the C3 framework, we focus on inquiry in social studies, and inquiry is guided by a question. And the ways in which students answer the questions, although, look, textbooks and materials like that have their place, but the way they're learning is much more engagement directly with their communities. So our students are telling us, get me to museums, get me to historic sites, get me out there. If I can't get out there, bring it to me. So many of our attendees might be living in communities where the nearest good museum may be 50 miles or more away, or maybe the broadband isn't great in your community, so it's hard even to connect online. But anytime you can provide some kind of experience for students directly, they want that. They want to interact with community speakers. They want to interact with political leaders. They would like more service learning and community service opportunities in general. Nearly a third of our students cite service learning directly as what would help them gain even more benefit from programs in their school experience. Students also say to us that they want more social studies experiences in general. They want more civic learning opportunities in general. So anytime you can use a program like service, anytime you can use any curricular materials, any questions, although of course we always start with social studies as our core foundation, civic learning, civic literacy is developed in every subject. And it's so important that all educators see themselves in a way as civic leaders, civic learners, civic teachers. Last thing I'll just share is we are tracking also the uses of technology in the classroom. For us, I'd say over 90% of our teachers tell us that they are very adept at working with primary sources in the classroom. They're very, we've had decades of training in working with print and digital primary sources, but there's less penetration of, let's say, cloud computing or AI or GIS systems or 3D printing. And I'll leave us kind of with the challenge of, as we're engaging students and thinking about careers in public service, we might also consider how are we also engaging them to work with the various tools that are being developed, under development. I bet you if you're dreaming it, somebody's probably already helping to create it right now. So how are we helping to prepare them to engage with technology meaningfully so that their use of different tools is also a driver of them being engaged in civic learning? Last comment I would just say is it does feel like so much of what is motivating our education system and the hope I have for it and the excitement I have for it is that it really is about engagement. It's about kids doing inquiry, kids being engaged in inquiry. It's about kids being engaged. So the focus isn't on, presenting, show us what you know and how you know it, but it's much more demonstrating what are you going to do with what you know. So in that space, we see that it's really vital that all students have opportunities to engage in civic learning and engage in thinking about what their roles as civic participants will be.
I love so much of what you just said. And some of the things that I was hearing there were, the kind of empowerment of students to feel that not only do you understand how things work, but you have a place in it and you can use your voice. And we've heard from I know we'll hear more from Dr. Dean in a few minutes about that and her students, but the fact that it is empowering and it is joyful, that kind of, how do we solve this problem can be, that's design, that's creativity. It's something that is generative. And one of the things that we were most excited about was that as we had students kind of practicing this inquiry arc, it involved them using a design process to design solutions. And what do you know? That's also a skill that's really essential in STEM and the engineering design process. And, so it's that kind of methodical thinking through solutions, and it's fun. And it's, as you say, engaging. It's fun for teachers too, because much more than worksheets. And I can speak from experience for that. And I want to turn to Emily, because I think when we talk about joy and empowerment and voice, it makes me think about the incredible stories that StoryCorps has developed and why you develop them, and what role you see those playing. So I wanted to ask you, you've developed these powerful stories that teach us and students how we live and work together in community, all the different communities we're part of in our lives. And many of those stories we've been fortunate enough with our partnership to be able to include in the service curriculum. So from your perspective, how do you think we can create opportunities to make civic learning and participation relevant and powerful in the way that you're tapping into in those stories for young people?
Thank you, Jessica. And I'm feeling so invigorated and inspired listening to Meg and Larry speak as well, and thinking about all of the ways that in the service curriculum, we were able to bring stories to life throughout those topics. So for folks who don't know or haven't heard, at StoryCorps, we have a vast archive of everyday people talking about their lives and what matters to them and their experiences in their own words. So it's essentially this very rich set of primary sources where we're hearing us talk about that. And we have been excited to share these selections from that archive in the curriculum so that we can bring those voices into the classroom. And those voices really are everyday people. So they could very well be a student's grandparents, their parents, their cousins, their classmates, themselves. And that's really the vision there, that they could see themselves in that, and they can see their families and their communities reflected. Because I think, to your question, really StoryCorps' part in this is a little bit about a tool, like how can we engage more? And so we see story as a way to really invite students in, to invite each other in to more complex topics. So we may be talking about abstract ideas. We may be talking about the impact of institutions on our lives and laws and actions on the individuals and the individuals on those, but we're actually hearing that in a personal way. And so that really invites us into the room. And that's what we hear from teachers all of the time, which is those stories are a way to open the door. And those stories also allow us to practice the necessary skills of listening and engaging with curiosity for the people in our lives. And so, and then extend that curiosity to your classmates, extend it into your community, extend it into the spaces of people who are in careers that you might be interested in, to people who are taking action in their community that they'd like to. But the most important, or equally important, but the most exciting piece, I think, that we see as how story has helped folks engage is that it helps students to really begin to reflect and take action because they're seeing themselves reflected, because they're seeing their communities reflected. They're beginning to translate those concepts into themselves and into action in their community. So they're able to say, I'm hearing who this person is. Who am I? Who is my community? What matters to me? And how can I shape my community? What actions can I shape? How can I be the main character in my own story? And so that's really the power, I think, for us to bring these first person narratives into the space to give it that reality in the moment.
I love that, Emily. And it reminds me so much of, we've placed a lot of emphasis on empathy and kind of thinking about what is the common good. We know teenagers particularly, you start with yourself. A lot of adults actually also do the same thing. And thinking about how we begin to broaden that out and think about what I want is this, what does that mean for what's good for our community? And I just love that you're addressing that through the personal and through those real stories, those real voices, and letting us use that with our students. So I know our segment I'm running out of time, but I just want to say how much I've appreciated having all of you with us, and just the perspectives that you bring, the experience and expertise you bring. And we've been lucky to be able to use it to help enrich the service curriculum. So I'm going to, in our last few minutes, turn it over to Wendy Rivenberg, who is going to be talking with Dr. Dean about the perspective of educators who teach civics. Wendy?
Thank you so much, Jess, and thank you to our partners who spoke so eloquently on these issues that we're grappling with so much energy, trying to bring joy. I hope to see more questions and comments in the margin, especially. Thank you for joining us here. My name is Wendy Rivenberg, and I lead the curriculum development for the Service Project at EDC. We benefited enormously from engaging teachers around the country who chose to work with us to pilot the curriculum with their students. They have generously shared their feedback so we could further develop and refine it to be more user-friendly and really resonate with teachers. So I'm delighted to introduce you to an incredibly dedicated educator who piloted service. Dr. Deton Dean is a teacher at Booker T. Washington High School in Shreveport, Louisiana, and we're so grateful you're here to share your insights. I do want to note that unfortunately our other teacher panelist, Asim Ghaffar, a teacher at the College Preparatory School of America in Lombard, Illinois, is unable to join us today as planned. But we're always seeking other opportunities to give Asim and our pilot teachers a forum to share their experiences with facilitating robust civic learning. So, to turn to Dr. Dean, from your experience, I'd love to hear how you feel civic inquiry affects student engagement.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for inviting me. To answer that question for my high school students, because since I had freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, a very diverse group as far as their learning and their experiences. One of the things I learned and one of the things I truly believe in now is that when students participate in civic engagement, that they begin to gain a perspective of self and that they're able to collaborate with others who may believe or think differently than what they do. And they gain opportunities to be what I would consider constituent zero, meaning that they gain self-efficacy and they get to see their role in impacting positive change from their level up. One of the things I know my students learned, and they've demonstrated time and time again, is that when using inquiry-based learning, it increases their interaction with information, their interaction with community, their interaction from just learning it on the paper to actually going out and applying it, application, and then coming back after the application, reflecting, making changes, and going back out to interact with whatever learning they've engaged in again. They get that follow-up. They get to, it allows them to be introduced to a world that they may or may not have had to actively engage in before. And it gives them a better grasp, more insight on what's going on in the world around them.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that sort of focusing in on the local community as a kind of microcosm of the larger civic community and the world we live in. I think we've been hitting on this theme a lot already, and I'd be really interested. I know that the audience would be really interested to hear what your experience is with integrating media literacy specifically into civic learning and the impact that has on your students.
Of course, it was funny to a degree, but what our students know of what our students had, how they engaged in civic literacy, and then when we tore it apart and had them actually look at the story behind, was two different things. One of the best compliments that a student gave me at the end of a unit was, I guess everything that TikTok taught me isn't true. So getting them to understand the backstory, getting them to understand that there might be a piece of truth, but then everything else could go left or right, and then going back and digging for it themselves was important, because I believe that with so much going on in the world and so much, so many opinions about it being put out in pretty packages, that until our students understand media, have a good grasp on media literacy, that they are not going to be able to truly get the true picture. That I think media literacy helps our students to begin to get to the core. It begins to allow them to see beyond the music, beyond the 30-second snippet, and to actually see what's behind the veil.
It's empowering, right? That's what I always felt like when working with students and asking them to peek behind the curtain and to understand what comes into play when a story is deemed to be important and put above the fold, and that can tap into that energy that students can bring. What are some of the ways that you've worked to help bridge the classroom and community, that gap between the classroom and the community?
One of the things that I love having is guest speakers. That's step one. Well, step one is introducing students to a construct. Step two is introducing people from that construct into their safe space, which is their classroom. And then step three is getting them out from the classroom to the community. So it's, for my students, it was a step process where the service curriculum allowed multiple real world examples and scenarios throughout each of the modules, to where the students had multiple touch points of interactions with multiple community issues, multiple community resources. Like, for example, one of my students' favorites was StoryCorps. It was so diverse, it was so rich, it was so many great examples that my students could relate to. And it's not coming from Dr. Dean, their teacher, it's coming from somebody else, but it's so real and so meaningful to them that they could carry that conversation on, and from that conversation go out and do other things. Another way is how that the classroom can connect to the community is showing them how their student voice is a feature, and showing them how their student voice is a way to actually impact change. It's one thing about my students that I know about my students, that they want to be heard and they want to have a role in what they're learning. So by giving them a voice and allowing them to go from here in these 25 seats to out there in their community, doing different community service, being able to talk to and engage with different people who they may not have just interacted with on their own. That's how one way that the curriculum helped me to bridge classroom community. It opened up many ways from the student's point of view to get them out in their community doing certain things and actually doing the work of civics that we call civics.
Thank you so much for that connection. I also wanted to share our friend and your colleague, Kim Bundy, her story about that bridge between the classroom and the community, where students would attend the school board meetings. And even after the term expired, at least, or the sort of the grade was no matter an issue any longer, they wanted to go back to another meeting. And then Kim shared that the school board members were looking for her students to be part of that meeting. And what that really struck me, that it's it's not only the student, him or herself, that is affected, themselves that are affected by civic engagement, but it's the people around. Everyone sort of benefits when people are more engaged. And that's what I'm hearing you say with your reflections on your students' experience. So sort of building on that a bit, can you talk about a time when your students got inspired, when they shared something, or were inspired, motivated to take action like we're talking about?
Yes. I had a wonderful friend. She was a babysitter of mine growing up, and in her entire life, she has been actively engaged in community change. She at the time we did it, she was 101 years old. Her name is Daisy Austin. She's from Chesapeake, West Virginia. She was able to Zoom into our classroom, and she Zoomed 2 days, and she talked about so many different things, and she took questions. And one of the questions that a lot of my students had was about, we have a school uniform thing going on down here, and they were very concerned about their school uniform. And she's a former administrator. And so she asked them questions and they responded. And what my students ended up doing is they went out and they began to ask the questions of why and how and what if, and well, can we do this? And so at the end of that, they took this year, these are the kids from last year. So this year, they started the year off, they had their points made, they had their presentation, they even had a little PowerPoint together, and they presented to our administration about the dress code, specifically hoodies. And I'm going to count it as a win for them, because they were allowed to wear certain types of hoodies, not the kind they wanted to wear, but it was a small change in the dress code for them. And it was a big victory for them, because they were able to get together an issue that was important to them, that they took to heart, and pulled it together. And this is even the kids who graduated, so they're not affected by the hoodie rule, but the now juniors and sophomores were a part of that. They pulled it together. They went and talked to who they needed to talk to. They came with evidence and receipts, and they won a victory. So that's a small step. So now these same kids are looking at other things. At the beginning of the school year, in addition to hoodies, it was there's a policy about what fruits and foods can be sold, as far as sodas and everything. So my kids have gotten together and they have found what ices could be sold to them at school as a treat. So that's them once again being inspired to go out and actually take action. And yes, those are two examples of building level action, but I firmly believe that once a student gets involved in that type of change, it goes with them. So it carries outside of the school with them to college or to whatever community they go to. Because as my students get to see and understand what their role is and how to ask questions and how to bridge these gaps, they're engaged in it. And engagement is something that does not just stop. So once they're engaged a little bit, that's an open door to so many other things.
It's a path to active citizenship.
Very much so.
Well, thank you so much for sharing those reflections and that story. I see it's generated a lot of response, a lot of excitement in the chat, and we're so grateful for your contributions today, but also the whole time that you've been involved in service. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Tony.
Well, thank you, Wendy. And Dr. Dean, absolutely incredible to hear from you again, and to hear how the curriculum that we've dreamed up is real and alive for young people. There was one question that I wanted to bring to you because I thought it was compelling, and Liz Knox had asked about this question of voting. You know, voting is often seen as the demonstration of civic participation. And did you have any ideas, Dr. Dean, about what's something that we could do to motivate more young people to vote, the 18 to 24-year-olds?
One of the things that we've started doing is well, actually last year when we did this curriculum, we started to show students the different roles that elected officials have, from how late is the community center to open, to where can a dog park be put, to, you know, why is this school closed versus this school, or why do these kids go here versus here? And once they see the impact of local elections and those elected officials have on them, it grows from there, because they're teenagers. I know I was a little bit self-centered as a teenager. In general, that is a typical thing as a typical teenager vibe. So you have to show it to them from their point of view and how important their point of view is. Right now, I have a group of kids who are heavily in an election, because last year we had a sheriff elected by one single vote. And all the upheaval that happened after that, my students, what I'm saying, they say we love the drama of it, and they are attracted to it, and they have worked so hard on both sides of this issue to kind of get people to understand, to come out and say, hey, one vote got us here, what can 10 do? So it's kind of, you have to kind of attach it to where they are now and take it from there.
That's great. So we're nearly out of time. Again, I want to thank you, Dr. Dean, and I want to thank all our panelists for participating today. For Lisbeth, our great CEO, who introduced the session and helped us get kind of a grounding in this. To Louis Lopez at Department of Defense, and thank you for all of the support. We've loved working on this program. To our partners, Larry at NCSS, Meg at Namely, and Emily at StoryCorps, as well as all our partners. And I really want to thank Civics Now and the folks at iCivics for including us in Civic Learning Week. We are thrilled to be a part of this coalition and love working with you all. And just before we leave, just a quick request. Jess, if you can put this in the chat, we have a link to an evaluation. All the Civics Now events are sharing the same evaluation. And we'd love it if you just take a minute and give your feedback on this session, because it'll be very helpful for us and for the coalition in planning events like this in the future. Again, thank you all for joining. Have a fantastic Civic Learning Week. If you're attending the forum tomorrow, we hope to see you there. And do follow up with us. If you're using service or if you're interested in service, please visit us at service.edc.org or write service@edc.org. And again, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you all soon.